I think from the enterprise AI perspective, I think there are 3 or 4 criteria we look at. One, is it a horizontal? We are generally not so keen on horizontals, particularly if it is horizontal cutting across CRM, customer help desk, etc. I think that space has been taken. If there's anybody, executing that space in India, the India opportunity may not be that enticing for us as far as VCable returns are concerned at Mela Ventures. So in that context, I think there are 3, 4 things we look out for in these kind of plays. One is that, are you focused on domains? Does the team bring a sharp understanding of the domain? Which means that we want verticalized setups, which is why I talked about financial services and healthcare earlier, right? So that's one thing. And in these kind of situations, typically we'd look for founding teams who have some understanding of domain, either from a selling perspective or from enterprise architecture perspective, or both, preferably. So both are founding teams in our first fund in this domain, financial services domain, do fulfill this criteria. The second, I think, is workflow integration. We just don't want wrappers sitting on top of LLMs. We want a deep level of process integration, workflow integration. And for the same reasons we said, if you're deeply integrated into a workflow, it becomes difficult to pull out. The switching costs tend to be higher. So we like to get an understanding of to what extent are you really embedded in the client's workflow. The client may have some traditional software like SAP, ERP. If it's a manufacturing shop floor, it could be warehousing, management software, etc. How well are you plugged into that? And how will you work with real-time data? So that's the second level, I think. The third would be data, proprietary data flywheels. We want to see how much of data you have is proprietary versus just something that's available on open source or just open data. Because I think there's only so much you can do if you're working on open source data. So if there's real customer data on which you're getting some inputs, then that acts as a moat. And finally, on the fourth thing, regulation and auditability, at least in those kind of industries where you see that. So if a startup fulfills 3 of these 4 criteria, I think it's a good gating mechanism for us to go second stage. On the DeepTech side of things, which talks about AI, we want to understand physical AI is obviously becoming increasingly important. So we look for evidence of that. Hardware plus software plus IP plus data can be a very powerful combination and can be reinforcing combination, right? Because sometimes you can just sell software. You can license the software, but the client finds it messy unless you're able to implement in the hardware. If somebody comes with that, I think it becomes a powerful combination. So if you look at some of our deep tech companies we have invested in, I think they bring in this entire layer of hardware plus software plus data plus AI. It could be AI on edge increasingly, because we don't necessarily want to send everything to the cloud. Yes. So from that perspective, we have a different set of criteria that they don't necessarily need to be revenue generating at the time of an investment. But because the product itself is the barrier to entry, right? So we don't necessarily insist that you should get revenues, but we want to see where along the product curve you are. We don't want to necessarily fund something that's in TRL 3 or 4. That'll be in TRL 6, 7, where there is some customer input that's already happening to help adoption. Then we are more comfortable to do that because we would rather that the founder team has solved substantially for the product risk and technology risk, and the G team risk we're happy to take on if we think that there is enough demand in the market for that kind of a solution. So in that way, the criteria is a little bit different, but in both cases, I think the scope for AI is huge, but it can't be standalone AI.